On a Tuesday night in October, a delivery truck ran a red light on 5th and Meridian, and Vivian Cole's carefully controlled life came to a violent stop. She woke up in the ICU to an empty room. Her husband arrived 2 hours later, dressed like he'd come from a dinner party. His first question was about the car. Her brother stopped by long enough to ask a nurse whether she had a will on file. Her mother-in-law sat for 15 minutes, spent most of it on the phone, and left without looking back. So Vivian made a decision. She closed her eyes, slowed her breathing, and let them all believe she was still unconscious. Not because she was angry, because she needed to know, with no room for doubt, who would stay when there was nothing left to gain from staying. The answer was no one. No one except Malik Reed. He was a single father, black, broad-shouldered, quietly exhausted in the way only parents of sick children ever are. His 8-year-old son was in the room next door fighting off pneumonia. Malik had wandered in by accident one night looking for a nurse and stopped when he saw that Vivian's room was empty. He didn't know her name. He didn't know what she was worth. He only saw a woman alone in the dark. So he pulled up a chair. He didn't rescue her with grand gestures or dramatic declarations. He just kept coming back, night after night. And somehow, that turned out to be the one thing no one else in her life had ever done. If this is the kind of story that makes you stop and think, stay with us. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Vivian Cole did not do weakness. It wasn't a rule she had written down anywhere. It didn't need to be. It had simply become the architecture of her life, built brick by brick over 2 decades of early mornings, missed dinners, and decisions made alone in offices that went quiet after everyone else had gone home. She had started with nothing: a studio apartment in Baltimore, a student loan that followed her like a second shadow, and a refusal to let either of those things be the end of the sentence. By 29, she had launched her own firm. By 34, she had taken it national. By 38, Cole Strategic Group operated in 11 cities, employed over 200 people, and generated the kind of revenue that made other executives quietly recalculate their own ambitions. People admired Vivian. Some feared her. A few, the ones who had watched her long enough, pitied her, though they would never have said so to her face. What they saw in boardrooms was precision. What they didn't see was the rest of it. The way she sat in her car for 5 minutes before walking into her own house, bracing herself for whatever version of indifference was waiting inside. The way she had stopped expecting her husband Devin to ask about her day, not because she had given up, but because she had simply run out of the energy it took to keep being disappointed. She kept a small apartment in the city, had held the lease for 3 years, originally for late nights when board meetings ran past midnight. Over time, without quite meaning to, it had become the place she went when she needed to breathe. When the house she shared with Devin felt less like a home and more like an arrangement both of them had agreed to stop examining too closely. Her family, her brother Thomas, her mother-in-law Gloria, the rotating cast of relatives who appeared at holidays and emergencies, had learned over the years to treat her less like a person and more like a resource. Something to draw from. Something that would keep giving as long as no one looked too closely at the cost. Vivian knew all of this. She had known it for a long time. But knowing something and being willing to dismantle your entire life around it are two very different things. So she kept moving, kept signing, kept showing up. Told herself that this was just what love looked like in practice. Imperfect, transactional, disappointing in the small ways that people didn't write songs about. She almost believed it. The accident happened on a Tuesday. She was on her way back from a client meeting downtown, sitting in the back of her car reviewing a contract on her phone, when a delivery truck blew through a red light on 5th and Meridian and hit them broadside. The impact was sudden and total. One moment the city was moving past the window, and the next there was glass and silence and a ringing in her ears that swallowed everything else. She woke up in the ICU 4 hours later. The room was white, the room was quiet, and the room was completely empty. For a moment she thought she must have the time wrong. Maybe it was the middle of the night. Maybe no one had been reached yet. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation folding itself together just outside her field of vision. She looked at the clock on the wall. It was 9:47 in the evening. Her phone was on the bedside table. The screen was crowded with notifications. She scrolled through them slowly, her ribs protesting with every small movement. The Henderson contract. Did you sign before the accident? Board call tomorrow at 8 a.m. Are you still leading? Vivian, what's the status on the Mercer account? 14 messages. Not one of them asked if she was in pain. Devin arrived at 10:30. He was wearing the navy blazer he saved for client dinners, and his hair was freshly combed. He stepped into the room, looked at her in the bed, and did a quick visual scan the way a person checks into a hotel, assessing the situation, calculating the inconvenience. How bad is it? He asked. 2 ribs, a concussion. She watched his face. They're keeping me overnight for observation. He nodded slowly, the way he nodded in meetings when someone presented a problem that was going to require more time than he had allocated. What about the car? Vivian looked at him for a long moment. I don't know, Devin, she said quietly. I didn't think to ask. He stayed for 40 minutes. He spent 20 of them on his phone in the hallway. The night shift settled in around her after he left. A nurse came to check her vitals, adjusted something on the IV line, and gave her the practiced, gentle smile of someone who had learned not to comment on the fact that certain patients' rooms stayed empty long after visiting hours began. Vivian lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling. She had been in that bed for hours, and in all that time, not one person had asked if she was scared. Not one person had held her hand. Not one person had sat down next to her and simply been there. Not for the company, not for the assets, not for the signature on the bottom of the check. Just there. The way you are for someone you actually love. The thought arrived without drama, the way the most devastating thoughts usually do. If I couldn't give them anything, if tomorrow I woke up with nothing left to offer, would a single one of them still be here? She didn't know the answer, and she realized, lying there in the fluorescent hush of the ICU, that not knowing was no longer something she could live with. Dr. Patricia Owens had been Vivian's personal physician for 6 years. She was the only person in Vivian's professional orbit who had ever told her things she didn't want to hear, about her blood pressure, about her sleep, about the chronic tension she carried in her shoulders like a second skeleton. Vivian trusted her precisely because she didn't need anything from her. She called her at 11:15. I need a favor, Vivian said, and I need you to tell no one. Dr. Owens arrived within the hour. She listened without interrupting. When Vivian finished explaining, she was quiet for a moment, then said, You understand I can't falsify records. I'm not asking you to falsify anything. I'm asking you to let people believe what they already want to believe. Vivian held her gaze. Tell them I'm stable but unresponsive, that the neurological picture is uncertain, that it may take time. Vivian, I need to know the truth about my own life. Her voice didn't waver. I've spent 20 years building things for people who I'm no longer sure ever saw me at all. I need to know if I'm right, and I can't find out if they know I'm watching. Dr. Owens studied her for a long time. Then she exhaled slowly and reached for her clipboard. I'll tell the staff you're in a medically induced rest and that visitors should keep noise to a minimum. She paused at the door. I want daily check-ins, and the moment you've heard what you need to hear, you end this. Agreed, Vivian said. And Vivian, Dr. Owens turned back one more time. I hope you find something worth waking up for. Vivian didn't answer. She closed her eyes, slowed her breathing until it became even and shallow and indistinguishable from sleep. And then she waited. She told herself she was doing this to gather information, to confirm what she already suspected, to build a clear-eyed case for the decisions she would eventually have to make. She did not let herself think about how frightening it was, the possibility that she was right, that she would lie there for days, and the people who were supposed to love her would circle like they were waiting for something to be released, and not one of them would once reach out and simply hold her hand. She pushed that thought down, locked it behind the same door where she kept everything else she couldn't afford to feel. Outside the window, the city continued its indifferent hum. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped in slow, steady intervals. Vivian Cole, who had never once in her adult life allowed herself to be still, lay perfectly still. and listened. The first full day passed the way she had expected it to. Devin arrived mid-morning with his brother and a man Vivian recognized as Robert Hale, the family's estate attorney. She had met Robert exactly twice, once at a charity dinner, once at a Christmas party where he had spent most of the evening by the bar. He was not the kind of lawyer you called when someone was in the hospital because you were worried about them. He was the kind you called when you needed to understand your options. They stood near the window, speaking in the careful, lowered voices of people who believed they were being considerate. The operating agreement gives the board authority to appoint an interim director if the CEO is incapacitated for more than 30 days, Robert said, flipping through something on his phone. We'd want to move before that window opens. Get ahead of it. What about the personal accounts? Devin asked. Joint holdings are accessible. The business accounts are another matter. Those would require a formal incapacity ruling or power of attorney. She never signed a POA. No, Robert said. She didn't. There was a pause. She was always very careful about that, Devin said, and the way he said it, flat, slightly resigned, like a man reflecting on an inconvenience rather than a person, told Vivian everything she needed to confirm about the last several years of her marriage. She kept her breathing even. She kept her face still. She had always been careful. He was right about that. The second day brought her mother-in-law, Gloria, a trim woman in her late 60s who moved through life as though it owed her an apology. She arrived at noon, set her handbag on the chair nearest the door, not the one beside the bed, never the one beside the bed, and stood in the middle of the room looking at Vivian the way people look at an inconvenient piece of furniture they aren't sure where to put. She made one phone call while she was there. Vivian caught fragments of it, enough to assemble the full picture. Don't know how long this goes on. The doctors won't commit to anything. Whole household is at a standstill. The accounts are frozen. Devin can't get access to... Not the way I would have chosen to handle things, but she was always so private about everything. You couldn't get near her finances without... Gloria left after 15 minutes. She did not touch Vivian's hand. She did not say goodbye to the room. On the third day, her brother Thomas came alone. Thomas was 34, charming in the effortless way of people who have never had to work very hard for anything, and had borrowed money from Vivian on 8 separate occasions over the past decade. She had stopped counting after the 5th. He always paid back a fraction, enough to keep the relationship technically functional, and borrowed again before the ledger had time to balance. He stood at the foot of her bed for a moment, hands in the pockets of his jacket, and studied her with an expression she could not fully read from behind closed eyes. Then he stepped into the hallway and stopped a passing nurse. "Excuse me, my sister. Has she made any arrangements? Legal ones, I mean? A will, anything like that?" The nurse's voice was professionally neutral. "I wouldn't have access to that information, sir." Right, of course. Is there someone I could speak to? An administrator, maybe?" Vivian heard his footsteps move away down the corridor. She lay very still. She had known, in the abstract, that the people in her life valued what she provided more than who she was. She had known it the way you know something you have spent years making peace with, at a distance, softened by the daily business of living. But hearing it like this, stripped of all context and pretense, reduced to its plainest form in the acoustic clarity of a hospital room, it was different. It landed differently. It did not make her angry. That was the thing she hadn't anticipated. She had expected anger, had braced for it, and instead what arrived was something quieter and more final. A weariness so deep it had no bottom. The particular exhaustion of a person who has just confirmed, beyond any reasonable doubt, something they had always been afraid was true. She had spent 20 years being needed. Not once had she been simply loved. He came on the third night. It was late, close to midnight, and the ward had settled into its overnight rhythm of soft footsteps and distant monitors. Vivian was awake behind closed eyes, running the same thoughts in slow circles, when she heard the door open and stop. Not the brisk, purposeful entry of a nurse, not the reluctant shuffle of someone obligated to be there, just a pause. Like a person who had walked in expecting one thing and found another. She heard him take a single step inside, then stop again. "Wrong room," he said quietly to no one in particular. She could hear in his voice that he was talking to himself, the way exhausted people do when they've been alone with their thoughts too long. This is not 412. He didn't leave. She felt more than heard him turn back toward the door, and then not go through it. The chair beside her bed, the one no one had sat in, scraped softly against the floor. He sat down slowly, the way a man sits when his body has been carrying something heavy for too long, and finally found a place to set it down. "My son's next door," he said after a moment. Still quiet, still more to himself than to her. "Room 411. He's 8. His name is Marcus." A pause. "Pneumonia. The doctors say he's turning a corner, but you know how that goes. You keep waiting for the numbers to mean what they say." Vivian said nothing. She kept her face neutral, her breathing slow. "He asked me this morning if clouds have a smell." A low exhale. Not quite a laugh, but close to one. "I told him I'd find out, which means I now have to figure out if clouds have a smell, because he will absolutely remember that I said that." Another pause. "I looked it up. Apparently they do. Something like rain and electricity. Petrichor, it's called." He said the word carefully, like he'd only just learned it. He's going to think that's the greatest thing he's ever heard. Vivian lay still and listened to a man talk about his son, and something in the room, some quality of the air, changed. She couldn't have named it precisely. It was not dramatic. It was not the lifting of a weight or the clearing of a sky. It was smaller than that. The simple, strange relief of being in the presence of someone who wanted nothing from her. He stayed for 40 minutes. When he left, he said, "Good night," to the room, to her, though he had no reason to believe she could hear it, and pulled the door closed gently behind him. He came back the next night. This time he brought food, a container of rice and something that smelled like garlic and herbs, the kind of meal assembled in a real kitchen by someone who cooked with intention. He set a small portion on the bedside table next to the untouched cup of hospital water. "I know you're not eating," he said, settling into the chair, "but my mother always said that the smell of a good meal does something for a person even when they can't sit up for it." He unscrewed the lid of his own container. "I don't know if that's science or superstition. With her, it was hard to tell the difference." He ate quietly. He didn't fill the silence compulsively, didn't narrate his way through it. He just existed in the room and let the room be what it was. And somehow that was the least lonely Vivian had felt since she'd woken up here. "Marcus drew a picture today," he said at one point, "of our apartment, except he gave it a swimming pool, which we absolutely do not have. I told him that was wishful thinking. He told me that was the whole point of drawing." He was quiet for a moment. "Kid's 8 years old and he already has a better philosophy of art than I do." When he left that night, Vivian realized she had been listening so hard she'd forgotten, for stretches of time, to feel the ache in her ribs. The third night he came, he didn't eat. He sat down and he was quiet for a long time. Not the quiet of someone with nothing to say, but the quiet of someone choosing their words carefully. "I've been thinking," he said finally, "about what it means to rest." His voice was lower than usual, softer. "Not because you're tired, but because you've earned it. Because you've been going at something so long and so hard that stopping doesn't feel like stopping. It feels like failure." He paused. Marcus's mom was like that. She never stopped. Not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't think she was allowed to. The room was very still. "I don't know what your life looks like. I don't know what you carry." He shifted in the chair and his voice dropped further until it was barely above a whisper. The tone of someone saying something they mean in the deepest, most unperformed way. "But I hope when you wake up, you let yourself rest. Not because you've run out of anything, but because you've given enough. You are allowed to just be, without it costing you something." Vivian lay completely motionless. She had heard hundreds of speeches in her life. Motivational ones, strategic ones, funeral ones. She had sat across from therapists who said approximately the right words in approximately the right order and had felt almost nothing. But this unrehearsed, sideways offering from a man who didn't know her name, who had no agenda, no angle, no relationship to protect. arrived somewhere nothing else had reached in a very long time. The difference, she understood now, was that he didn't need her to receive it well. He wasn't saying it to fix her. He wasn't saying it to be remembered for it. He was saying it because it was true, and because she was there, and because it seemed like the kind of thing a person alone in the dark might need to hear. She did not cry. Her face did not move, but something behind it did. Something she had kept sealed for so long she had forgotten it was still there. She wasn't trying to catch anyone anymore. She wasn't cataloging evidence. The case she had come here to build was complete, and it had stopped mattering, and what had replaced it was something she didn't have a word for yet. A raw, unstructured longing for a life that felt like these moments. Small, honest, without performance. She had spent so many years being powerful that she had mistaken power for safety, and she had mistaken safety for enough. It wasn't enough. It had never been enough. While Malik kept he used the phrase, "At some point we have to be practical," Dr. Owens added. I told him I wasn't in a position to speculate. "Thank you," Vivian said. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." She wasn't fine, but she was clear. Clearer than she had been in years. There is a particular kind of grief that arrives not with tears, but with the calm of absolute certainty. She had been grieving this marriage, she realized, for a long time. She had just been doing it quietly, in the margins of a life too full of other obligations to make room for it. Thomas, she learned through a nurse who spoke too freely near open doors, had placed 2 calls to members of Kohl's Strategic Group's board of directors. Not to inquire about operations, to introduce himself. She had given him those board members' names herself years ago at a family dinner where he had asked about her work, and she had briefly allowed herself to believe he was curious. She lay in the hospital bed and thought about all the doors she had opened for people who had walked through them looking for something that had nothing to do with her. On the morning of the 7th day, Malik came earlier than usual. He sat down. He placed something on the table beside her bed, a piece of paper, light as a breath. "Marcus drew something for you," he said. "He doesn't know your name. He calls you the sleeping lady. He wanted to give you something because—" He stopped, and she could hear the quiet smile in his voice. "Because he said it's not fair to be asleep without any pictures to look at." He didn't say anything else for a while. Vivian kept her eyes closed, but she could feel the drawing there. A child's clumsy, earnest lines on a sheet of copy paper, offered to a stranger for no reason except that an 8-year-old had decided she deserved something to look at. Malik sat back in his chair. The morning light came through the window blinds in long, pale strips. A cart went by in the hallway. Down the corridor, someone's monitor beeped its patient, steady rhythm. He was not trying to reach her. He was not performing patience or demonstrating virtue. He was simply a man sitting in a chair, keeping someone company, the way people used to do before they decided their time was worth more than their presence. Vivian lay still for another long moment. Then she opened her eyes, not because she had everything figured out, not because she had assembled every piece into a clean, actionable plan, but because she did not want to keep pretending. She did not want to spend one more minute lying still while life, real, ordinary, imperfect life, moved through the room around her. She turned her head slowly toward the chair. Malik Reed went very still when he saw her eyes open. His own eyes, dark, steady, carrying the particular depth of someone who had lived through difficult things without letting them hollow him out, widened slightly. He didn't call for a nurse. He didn't reach for his phone. He didn't say, "You're awake," the way people do when they want to announce something, to make it about the announcement. He just looked at her. And then quietly he said, "Hey." Vivian's throat was dry. Her voice, when it came, was rough from days of disuse. "Hey," she said. The hospital moved fast once the word spread. A nurse came within minutes, then 2 more, then Dr. Owens, who arrived looking composed in the way of someone who had been half expecting this and had prepared her expression accordingly. There were vitals to check, lights shone into pupils, quiet questions asked in the careful cadence of medical protocol. Malik stepped back without being asked. He stood near the window, out of the way, and watched the room fill with the efficient machinery of people doing their jobs. When Dr. Owens glanced at him, just briefly, a question without words, Vivian said, "He can stay," and that was the end of it. By the time the medical team cycled out and the room settled again, word had reached Devon. He arrived 20 minutes later, moving quickly, his face arranged into something that was meant to look like relief, but landed closer to calculation. He stopped in the doorway when he saw Malik. His eyes moved from Malik to Vivian and back again with a precise, measuring quality. "You're awake," he said. "I am," Vivian said. He crossed the room and took her hand, the first time he had touched her since the accident, and held it in both of his. His hands were warm and dry and familiar and completely wrong, and she let herself feel all of that at once without looking away from it. "We were so worried," he said. Vivian looked at him. She looked at him the way she had learned to look at contracts, not for what was written, but for what had been left out. "I know," she said. She did not say anything else. She did not need to. Thomas appeared an hour later, followed shortly by Gloria. The room acquired the particular tension of people who are unsure how much has been heard and are running quiet calculations behind their eyes. Vivian let them talk. She let them fill the space with the language of concern. "You had us terrified. We never left. We were here every day." And she listened to all of it from somewhere behind a pane of glass, clear and distant, and no longer breakable. When they ran out of words, she said simply and without heat, "I'd like to rest now. I'll be in touch soon." They filed out. Devon lingered at the door. "We'll talk tonight," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "We will," Vivian agreed, "but not here." That evening, after the last of the visitors had gone and the ward had settled into its quiet, Vivian asked Dr. Owens to step in. She told her she was ready to be discharged. Medically, the case was straightforward. Her ribs were healing, her concussion had cleared, and there was no clinical reason to keep her. Dr. Owens reviewed her charts, signed the paperwork, and before she left the room, paused with her hand on the door. "You know you can always come back if you need anything," she said. "I know," Vivian said, "but I won't need to." She called a car service that night. Her own vehicle had been totaled in the accident, and arranged for a rental to be ready the following morning. Then she sat in the chair beside her own bed, the one that had stayed empty for 7 days until Malik filled it, and she called Devon. The conversation was short. She told him she was filing for divorce. She told him she was retaining her own legal counsel and that he would be hearing from Sandra Reeves within the week. She told him she had no interest in a prolonged fight, that she would be fair, and that she expected the same in return. He was silent for a long time. "I figured," he said finally, his voice flat and unreadable. "After everything, I figured." "I know you did," Vivian said. She hung up. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel relieved exactly. She felt the way you feel when you have finally said out loud something you have been carrying silently for years. Lighter, yes, but also aware of exactly how long you chose to carry it. She called her attorney that same night. Not the firm's general counsel, not the family's estate lawyer. Her own attorney, Sandra Reeves, who had handled Vivian's private affairs for 9 years, and who, when Vivian explained what she needed, asked exactly 2 clarifying questions, and then said, "I'll have the preliminary paperwork drawn up by tomorrow morning." She also called her CFO, Greg Hartley, a meticulous man who had been with Cole Strategic for 7 years and whom she trusted completely. She told him to lock down all financial access that had been granted informally over the past week. He confirmed, without surprise, that 2 access attempts had already been flagged and paused by the system. "I assumed you'd want to know," he said. "I was waiting for you to call." "Thank you, Greg." "Welcome back, Vivian." She hung up and sat with that for a moment. Welcome back. She wasn't sure yet what she was coming back to or what shape it would take. But she knew, with the same clarity she brought to every decision that had ever mattered, that she was done building things that other people could dismantle behind her back. She was discharged the next morning. 2 days after that, she met with her board. She walked in without a cane, without an assistant, without the careful costuming of authority she had always believed she needed to be taken seriously. She sat at the head of the table and addressed Thomas's calls to two of the board members directly, named them, described the conversations as she understood them, and made clear, without raising her voice, that any future communication of that nature would be treated as a legal matter. The room was very quiet. "I want to be clear," she said, "that I am not here to perform a recovery for your benefit. I am here because this company is mine, and its direction is mine, and nothing about the last 10 days has changed that." She looked around the table. "If anyone has questions about continuity of leadership, I'm happy to answer them now." No one had questions. She drove herself to her city apartment afterward, the small one she had kept for 3 years, the one that had always felt like an exhale after a long-held breath. She stood in the middle of it for a moment, looking at the familiar walls, and thought that it was the first time in a long time she had stood somewhere and felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Marcus was discharged on a Thursday. Vivian found out because Dr. Owens mentioned it in passing, and she sat with that information for an afternoon before she made a decision. She went back to the hospital, not as a patient, not with an agenda, and found Malik in the corridor outside room 411, loading a duffel bag onto his shoulder while Marcus, pale but bright-eyed, carefully carried his own backpack like it was a matter of personal honor. The boy saw her first. "You're the sleeping lady," he said with the frank delight of a child who has not yet learned to be embarrassed by the things he notices. "I was," Vivian said. "I'm awake now." Marcus considered this with great seriousness and then nodded, apparently satisfied. He looked at his father. "Can we get pancakes?" "We can get pancakes," Malik said. He looked at Vivian over his son's head. His expression was unhurried, easy in the deep sense of the word, not casual but unguarded, the face of someone who had nothing to prove and nothing to protect. "I heard you," she said. "Everything you said in that room. I heard all of it." He was quiet for a moment, not surprised. She had the sense that some part of him had already known or suspected and had made peace with it. He nodded once, slowly. "I'm glad," he said. That was all. No questions, no claims on the moment, no invitation to make it larger than it was, just, "I'm glad." And that restraint, that complete absence of need, moved her more than any grand gesture could have. She had spent her whole life surrounded by people who expanded themselves to fill whatever space her attention made available. She had never understood, until now, how exhausting it had been to be in the room with all of them. "Thank you," she said. He met her eyes. "You would have been all right," he said. "You were already on your way." She didn't argue with that. Maybe he was right. Maybe the waking up would have happened eventually on its own, but she didn't think it would have felt like this. This particular quietness, this specific sense that the person who emerged from that hospital room was not a harder version of who she had been, or a more defended one, but something closer to the original. The woman she had been before she learned to perform her own strength. Marcus tugged on his father's sleeve. "Pancakes," he said with gentle but firm urgency. Malik laughed. A real one, low and warm, the laugh of a man who has allowed himself to be thoroughly governed by an 8-year-old and found it mostly agreeable. He shifted the bag on his shoulder and looked at Vivian one more time. "Take care of yourself," he said. "For real this time." "I will," she said. She meant it. She left the hospital on her own. No driver, no assistant, no one carrying anything on her behalf. Just Vivian Cole, in a coat that was slightly too light for the October air, walking through the sliding glass doors and into the sharp, clean light of a city afternoon. She stopped at the end of the walkway. The street in front of the hospital was moving. Cars and buses and people going places they considered important. The ordinary human traffic of a Thursday in the middle of a regular week. No one looked at her. No one knew she had spent 7 days lying still, while the people closest to her revealed themselves in the acoustic intimacy of a room they thought was empty. She stood there for a moment and breathed. She didn't have everything figured out. The divorce would be long. The legal architecture of her life would need to be rebuilt deliberately and from scratch. And there would be days, she knew this, when the loneliness of having dismantled so much at once would arrive without warning and sit with her in the way that loneliness does. But underneath all of that, steadier than any of it, was something she had not felt in so long she had almost stopped believing it was available to her. She was not afraid, not of being alone, not of starting over, not of the strange and unmapped territory of a life built around something other than what other people needed her to be. Somewhere across the city, a man was taking his son to get pancakes. A man who had never asked for anything from her, who had simply sat down in a room and talked about clouds and cooking and the things an 8-year-old says that stop you mid-sentence. He had not saved her. She understood that. She had done the saving herself in the long, quiet dark of her own reckoning. But he had shown her what it looked like. Kindness with no invoice attached, presence with no agenda behind it. And that had been enough to remind her that such things were real, that she was allowed to want them. Vivian pulled her coat tighter and started walking. Not away from anything, not this time. Just forward. At her own pace for once. As if she had all the time in the world to figure out where she was going. And for the first time in a very long time, she did. Some people spend their whole lives waiting to be rescued by someone who loves them. Vivian Cole was rescued by a stranger who didn't need anything from her. And that turned out to be the only kind of rescue that was ever going to work. Because here's what this story quietly reminds us. The people who change our lives don't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes they walk into the wrong room by accident and simply choose to stay. Sometimes kindness doesn't look like a grand gesture. It looks like a man pulling up a chair at midnight because he didn't want someone to be alone in the dark. You don't have to be in a hospital bed to ask yourself the question Vivian asked. You can ask it right now. The people around you, are they there for you or for what you provide? And more importantly, are you giving yourself the same grace you'd give a stranger? If this story moved you, if it made you think even for a moment, subscribe and stick around. We tell stories like this because we believe the right words at the right time can do exactly what Malik's did for Vivian. Remind you that you are allowed to rest, to reconsider, and to choose differently. We'll see you in the next one.